Stop rushing to buy a house just to say you own something. Guys, there's nothing wrong with renting if the opportunity to buy does not fit your lifestyle right now. And there's nothing wrong with buying if you actually understand what you're doing. What I don't agree with is the shame around renting. Like if you're renting, you're all of a sudden behind in life. That is so far from the truth. Renting gives you flexibility. It gives you options. It gives you room to move while you're still trying to figure things out. People treat home ownership like it's a badge of honor. Like it's something that you're just supposed to collect to prove that all of a sudden you're doing well in life. So they over leverage. They stretch themselves thin. They take on debt they can't comfortably manage just to say they own something. Guys, a mortgage isn't a milestone. It's a long-term commitment. A lot of what you see is smokes and mirrors. Some people are house poor. Some are over leveraged. And some people have lost thousands of dollars because of market conditions. I'm going to tell you guys a story. So I bought my condo during the pandemic when interest rates were really, really low. And as a result, I'm not going to lie, I paid a premium for my property. Looking back, yeah, I could have waited. I could have used that money that would have given me a better return on my investment, maybe in the stock market or somewhere else. But despite my experience, I do not regret my decision because I learned so much along the way. And I want you guys to understand this, that society glorifies home ownership and many people underestimate the pressure that comes with buying a home when timing just isn't right. So if you're renting right now, I want you guys to understand this. Please do not fall into someone else's timeline. There are upsides with both. Home ownership is powerful, but so is renting. Regardless of what side you're on, there will always be opportunities to build.
This is real. This is real. You know, it's interesting because when I used to work in schools as a teacher trainer, teaching teachers how to teach, one of the big things I'd always say to the teachers I was working with was everything works as long as it's done properly. And I think the issue we have right now is most people don't know how to do things properly. They're using generic ideas in order to produce specific results. And the problem is you're never going to get specific results from utilizing generic ideas. So hearing this breakdown, I largely agree. I definitely agree. I think some of the places where I might tweak is my thought process about the property and its use in general. But overall, I definitely agree. I think it's a very good point that we should stop shaming people for being in a position where they rent, because everybody at some point started off in a rental predicament in most cases in our community. And it's interesting because when you think of it like that, it starts to allow you to realize how different people are in terms of how they start their journey. And just going back to this conceptual idea of, you know, the shame that's placed upon people, one of the big things that I see, which I believe we're not giving people enough credit for, is that opportunity that they're taking, that step that they're taking to actually make way, to say to themselves, you know what, I want to get my first house. I want to do something. I want to make way. I don't want to be stuck in the same position I'm in for the rest of my life. So I'm going to do something, even if it's take my first step to rent, so that I can work towards being able to buy. I think we should give a lot more people a lot more credit for that. Now, the second side of this, which I think is super powerful to think about, is the shame element. Like, why would you shame people for their situation? Their situation right now is their situation. And here's the beautiful thing about any situation, that situation can change. I remember when I was single before. I was single, but I'm not single anymore. Why? Because that situation can change. I remember when I wasn't a father before, but I'm a father right now. Why? Because that situation can change. And the same too, even more so applies with people's financial situations. The same too, even more so applies with people's living situations. You may be renting right now, you may be owning right now, but you know, if you go and speak to 10 homeless people, I can guarantee you, you'll very quickly get a better understanding and perspective of life and realize that just because you own a house now doesn't mean you're going to own for the rest of your life. Just because you rent a house now doesn't mean you're going to rent for the rest of your life. So there's a few key metrics here which I think are super important just as a community for us to first start thinking about how we show love and appreciate and resonate with other people. The first thing is, let's stop shaming people for whatever their predicament or position is, because at the end of the day, if that's the approach we're going to take, guess what's going to happen? We are going to be pushing them to attempt to try to keep up with the Joneses. And if that's not something you want to do, don't let that be a message that you're pushing through. The second thing is, if we're people that are saying to ourselves, hold on a minute, we think it's best to do it this way, the thing that we should understand is before we got to where we are to do it the way we're doing it currently, we had to first work our way towards that in any way, shape, or form that we had to do that. Now, one of the big things that I want us to touch on, I guess I'd say, right, as I listen to what's being shared here, which I think is very, very pertinent, is understanding how the process, the architecture of this particular predicament actually even works. Because a lot of the time, for example, the lady here shares in a video that she was able to learn a lot when she overpaid for her condo, which she said she bought during the pandemic. And I think a lot of people don't realize the key that she's actually shared here. And what she said is she said that she was able to learn a lot. And this is what a lot of people miss. A lot of people miss that one of the biggest benefits we get as we go through any predicament is our learning. Our learning effectively is our leverage. And if you go through a specific situation, like for example, you overpay for a house, that's not good, right? Financially, that's not a good situation to be in. But if you're someone with the right mindset, you can apply that mindset and it can produce for you a skill set. And that mindset is, I just learned something from this situation. Yes, I went through it. Yes, I didn't want to go through it, but I was able to learn from it in order so in the future I can leverage it. And then when you leverage it, guess what? In the future, you get to be able to lean on the same thing you've been able to learn because of the fact that you've seen it as leverage. And unfortunately, too many of us aren't taking the learnings from our situation because we're just not seeing the earnings in the situation. So I want us to really take some time and think about what we've actually learned from the predicaments, the scenarios, the positions we've been in the past, which we may have at the time thought were negative. If you've rented a property in the past, or if you're renting right now, what have you learned from that experience? Have you learned what most people just say, oh, you're wasting money, you could use all of that rent money to buy a house? Well, the reality is it doesn't actually work like that. And you might be saying, Samuel, how can it not work like that? Well, there's so many ways it doesn't work like that. For example, most people, when they're buying a house, there are certain requirements. One of the requirements is for them to have a deposit. Now, if you don't have that deposit, how are you going to live? Where are you going to live? Are you going to say because let's even embellish these numbers, because the £2,000 per month you're using to rent your 3-bedroom apartment in London, because that £2,000 a month can be used to pay a mortgage for a 2-bedroom apartment, is that person wasting the money if they don't have a deposit? The answer is they can't be, because they don't have the deposit in order to get into the property in the first place. So that's the first thing to think about. There are requirements necessary in order to buy. Now, I invest in property. So because by virtue of the fact that I invest in property and I teach people and I coach people on how to invest in property, I understand, yes, there are ways you can buy properties. Yes, there are ways you can control properties without needing a deposit. But that doesn't mean that for the general public, for the majority of the world, that a deposit isn't necessary. It is necessary. The second thing is characteristics around your salary, okay? Your salary is an enabling factor in your ability to buy or not buy property. So for many people who say to you, oh, why do you buy why do you rent, when you should buy? What they don't realize is in order to rent, you don't necessarily need a deposit and you don't necessarily need the same requirements in terms of salary in order to rent. So there is an opportunity available for people to be able to rent where they cannot buy. So both sides of these opportunities, whether it's buying or renting, open up doors if you utilize these doors in order to use them for what they've been created for. Now, the last thing I want to share on this, which I think is super important as well, and very, very relevant in this predicament, is just the generalist principle. Because what generally happens is we have so many people in the world who are focused on taking information which is general. Now, the reason this is so important is because I guess in the UK, we study GCSEs, and most people don't even know what that stands for. But GCSEs stand for the General Certificate in Secondary Education. Okay, I'm going to say that again in case you need to pick up your pen. It stands for the General Certificate in Secondary Education. And what that basically means is getting your GCSEs doesn't make you a specialist in anything. It just makes you a generalist. And the reason why this is so important is because typically what people, or the way it's supposed to be, let me go back to the way it's supposed to be. The way it's supposed to be is when you finish your GCSEs, you might go to college and get some A levels, for example, right? Obviously, we now have vocational certificates and all of these other things, right? So it's a whole new landscape, but just follow me in terms of how it's supposed to be, right? Back in the day, the way it would be is you get your GCSEs, you go on to college, you get your A levels. Why? Because you're slightly specializing a bit more. When you're in secondary school and you're doing your GCSEs, you might study 9, 10, 12 subjects, right? But then when you go to your A levels, you're not studying 9, 10, 12 subjects. You're studying 2, 3, 4 subjects. Why? Because the mantra is the more specialized you become, the more income that should come. Okay. So after your A levels, traditionally people would go and study degrees. Okay. Now, when they study the degrees, they're no longer studying threes. In the A levels, you might have 3 or 4 subjects. When you get to your degree, you're typically studying 1 subject. Unless you're a little bit weird like me and you study a joint major. Like me, I studied computing and statistics. That was a joint major. All right. But typically what happens is you do your GCSEs, you're a generalist. You go do your A levels, you start to specialize. You do your degree, you're a bit more specialist, okay? And then you go higher into postgraduate, masters, and then you go even higher into doctoral programs, right? But the key is supposed to be, this was the map, the roadmap of education that it used to be. The more specialized you become, the more income that can come to you. And I think what's happening right now in society, which is getting people lost in this process, is the fact that they're focused on general information and attempting to use general information to get specialized outcomes without realizing that you need specialized information in order to get specialized outcomes. And the reason this really touches my heart is because I know a number of years ago when I used to attend a lot more professional athlete events like basketball games, etc., I'd have professional athletes reaching out to me and asking me in private on calls, how do I do this with my property journey, Samuel? Samuel, how do I get my next property, Samuel, etc.? And I would answer these people and start every conversation by sharing with these athletes, listen, bro, listen, you've got to start by making sure the information you're getting is tailored to your predicament, that it's tailored to your position. Because the biggest issue we have in society right now is people are jumping on generalized information for their specialized situation. And the only way you're going to succeed in life is when you realize that you have an individual set of circumstances. So you need specialized information for your specialized situation. With that being said, if you like this value, feel free to comment down below what your thoughts are, because I'd love to know. Side by side with that, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to be a part of the tribe. And as I usually say, remember that small keys open up big doors, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Good day, God bless. Let's go.
Small keys open big doors.